Gopi Jana Palapa Kiri Paratari Yasodanandana Praja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Palapa Giri Paratari Yasodanandana Praja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharatari Yasodanandana Praja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading Canto 10, Chapter 59, and the text is text 29. Tvampai Shishukushur Acha Utkatam Prabho Tamo Nirodaya Viparsi Asampritaha Stanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusha Bhavan Paraha Tvamvai Shishur Kushur Aja Ukatam Prabho Tamo Nirudaya Pipashi Asambritaha Stanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavan Para Tvamvai Shishu Kushur Aje Ukatam Prabho Tamo Nirudaya Pipashi Asambritaha Stanaya Satyam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavan Paraha. Please chant. Tvamvai Shishu Kushura Cha Ukatam Prabho Tamo Nirudaya Vipashi Asamrita Sanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavan Para Tvam Shikshu Raja Ukatam Prabho O Nirodaya Vipashi Asamrita Stanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavan Paraha Tvamvai Shishu Raja Ukatom Prabho Tamo Nirudaya Vipasya Sambrita Stanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavanpara. Tvam Vai Shishukshu Raja Ukatam Prabhu. Tamo Nirudaya Vivashya Sambrita. Sanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate. Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavanparaha. Tvam Vai Shishukshu Raja Ukatam Prabhu. Tamo Nirudaya Vivashya Sambrita. Sanaya Sattvam Jagato Jagatpate. Kala Pradhanam Purusho Bhavanpara. The word for word. Tvam, you. Vai, indeed. Shishukshu, desiring to create. Aja, unborn. Utkatam, prominent. Prabhu, O Master. Tamaha, the mode of ignorance. Nirodaya, for annihilation. Vipashi, you assume. Asambritaha, uncovered. Stanaya, for maintenance. Sattvam, the mode of goodness. Jagata, of the universe. Jagatpate, O Lord of the universe. Kala, time. Pradhana, material nature in its original undifferentiated state. Purusha, the creator, who interacts with material nature. Bhavan, you. Para, distinct. And the translation for text 29 is as follows. Desiring to create, O unborn master, you increase and then assume the mode of passion. You do likewise with the mode of ignorance when you wish to annihilate the universe, and with goodness when you wish to maintain it. Nonetheless, you remain uncovered by these modes. You are time, the Pradhana, and the Purusha, O Lord of the universe, yet still you are separate and distinct. And the purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. The word Jagata in the third line of this verse indicates that the functions of creation, maintenance, and annihilation are here mentioned in a cosmic context. The word Utkatam indicates that when a particular function is being carried out, whether universal creation, maintenance, or annihilation, the particular material quality associated with that function becomes predominant. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shai Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha, Gopika Kanta, Radha Kanta, Namostute, Tapta Kanchana, Gorangi, Radha Vrindavaneshwari, Vishabhanu, Sute Devi, Pranamami, Hari Priye. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Roma Padaswami Iti Namine. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is Goddess Bhumi talking, and there's commentary by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and I'm going to go through it piece by piece because this subject matter has some complexity. So his first part of his commentary says, so this is quoting Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Bhumi said, according to the time you carry out creation, maintenance and destruction of the universe through your Maya Shakti. Close quote. So in the introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada writes explaining through a comparison who is the supreme person, because that's who Goddess Bhumi is addressing. And Srila Prabhupada makes this comparison, explaining who's the supreme person and his relation with material energy, because that's the issue here. So this is Srila Prabhupada in the introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam, explaining this relation between the supreme person and his material energy. So listen to how simply Srila Prabhupada explains. It's quite wonderful. Even in our present experience, we know that nothing is generated from inert matter. But inert matter can be generated from the living entity. For instance, by contact with the living entity, the material body develops into a working machine. Men with a poor fund of knowledge mistake the bodily machine to be the living being. But the fact is that the living being is the basis of the bodily machine. The bodily machine is useless as soon as the living spark is away from it. Similarly, the original source of all material energy is the Supreme Person. And in brackets, this fact is expressed in all the Vedic literature, and all the exponents of spiritual science have accepted this truth. The living force is called Brahman, and one of the greatest acharyas, Sripad Sankaracharya, has preached that Brahman is substance, whereas the cosmic world is category. The original source of all energies is the living force, and he is logically accepted as the Supreme Person. He is therefore conscious of everything, past, present, and future, and also of each and every corner of his manifestation, both material and spiritual. So I hope that was quite clear, even though I'm reading this introduction from Srila Prabhupada. But the idea is that matter is inert, and for matter to actually move and be generated in some way, it requires a living force, a consciousness to do that. So Srila Prabhupada's very interesting thing of beginning with the individual being, uh, just understanding that it's the living spark within that allows for matter to be moved. Like, if you see a mountain, you see that and you often see this in city settings, there may be persons coming with their big tractors and they're breaking down slabs of stone, and then it's a person operating some other machine that's crushing stone. So it's the living force within the body that's allowing for the performance of those actions. So in the same way, anything that one's observing on a much larger scale, um, it's actually due to the living force that's within the supreme person that's ordering the whole cosmos. Um, so, a little bit further on in this introduction, there's a last sentence that I thought was very interesting. Srila Prabhupada says, consequently, the perfect personality is addressed in the Srimad Bhagavatam as Vasudeva, or one who lives everywhere in full consciousness and in full possession of his complete energy. So, you know, like a human being, when a human uses his or her energy, it's not that the energy is dissipated. There's a connection between the person and how that energy is used. So, if I pull this microphone out, I'm connected to my energy because I'm performing the pulling action. So, in the same way, on a very broad scale, Vasudev is actually in full possession of his complete energy. So he's connected to his energy. And of course, he's fully conscious of everything. I mean, in the same way, when one is functioning in one's daily life, one is conscious that, oh, I'm performing this action, or I'm going to perform the other action, or the result of my previous action was this. So there's consciousness. In the same way, the Supreme Person has that consciousness on a very broad scale. So that was trying to begin this conversation, in a sense, or discussion of how the Supreme Lord is connected to his energy. Now, of course, there's a tendency to attribute exclusive causality to the apparent mechanistic function of nature. So this is very common. So there's a mechanistic theory which is explained by Lord Krishna himself. So this is Lord Krishna as a young child explaining mechanistic theory to his father, because he actually wants, at that time, that his father stop the worship of demigods. So anyway, this is mechanistic theory, and Krishna explaining it. The causes of creation, maintenance, and destruction are the three modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. In particular, the mode of passion creates the universe, and through sexual combination causes it to become full of variety. So you can see the mechanistic theory. It doesn't bring in the supreme person or a supreme being or a supreme consciousness. It's merely that nature already has goodness, passion, ignorance inbuilt, and it requires passion to go and do and create. And that this actually is the way that creation happens in the universe, where you take out, supreme consciousness or a supreme person, and you'd merely make it that there's procreation that goes on through this passion in nature, that it's just a part of nature. So that's mechanistic theory. And that description given by Krishna is in the 24th chapter of the 10th canto. So Krishna carries on to explain this mechanistic theory. Impelled by the material mode of passion, the clouds pour down their rain everywhere, and by this rain all creatures gain their sustenance. So he's giving an example to show even how this mode of passion is operating. I mean, you just observe rain falls down everywhere. And because the rain is falling, and this is all part of, just mechanical workings of nature, all creatures get their sustenance, meaning, all the plants get their sustenance, and then the creatures feed off plants, and other creatures feed off those creatures. So there's a whole cycle, and it's just very mechanistic. Um, But if we return to the understanding that the original source of all energies is the living force, and that is the fundamental point, a spiritually advanced person can understand how the spiritual particle exists within the body. So it requires an intelligent person who can find the self within the body and can come to understand that actually there are external energies, and these external energies belong to a greater living force, namely a supreme person. And Krishna describes these external energies. I'm going to read the verse. Bhumir apo halo vayu kam mano buddhir evacha ahankara itiyam me Bina Prakritir Astadha. So that's Bhagavad Gita 7:4. And this is Krishna's description of these external energies and how they're connected to him. He says, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, all together, these 8 constitute my separated material energies. So there's a breakdown of this connection between the living force and the external energy, and Krishna's breaking it down into 8 parts. And so, looking at this more closely, material nature is called Prakriti, or the energy of the Lord, in his different incarnations or expansions, because it functions according to how he's expanded himself at a particular time, because it's coming from him, that energy. So for material creation, so looking at this material nature at the time when it's actually getting moved, so it's getting created, so to speak. So the living force, the supreme living force, is moving the material energy. So then at that time, Lord Krishna's expansion assumes 3 forms, 3 Vishnus. So the first one, Mahavishnu, creates the total material energy, known as the Mahatattva. Then the second Vishnu, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, enters into all the universes to create diversity. So remember, the living force is what's actually moving material energy. So first there's the creation of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. Then one's hearing that the second incarnation, so again the supreme person and the living force coming from the supreme person, it's Mahavishnu first, then Garbhodakshai Vishnu, who enters into all the universes to create that diversity, so rearranged in a particular way. Different planets, different systems. And the third, Kshirodakshai Vishnu, is known as Paramatma. So this is that living force, the super soul. So that incarnation of, or expansion of the Supreme Lord, is the form that enters into all the atomic particles. So it's present in every little aspect of the creation. So that sort of connects to how he's connected to his energy. He's present as Paramatma. So this is the generalization that Srila Prabhupada makes. And this is coming one's generalization in the purport to this verse 7:4 that I've read. So this is Srila Prabhupada's generalization. All the activities of the material world are directed by these 3 Vishnu expansions of Lord Krishna. So there's no two ways about it. It's a very clear generalization that everything is being directed by a supreme person and three expansions, particularly these three Vishnus. Uh, so taking into account that there's a criterion that needs to be met to understand this point, Srila Prabhupada adds a second point. Generally, one who does not know the science of God, Krishna, assumes that this material world is for the enjoyment of the living entities, and that the living entities are the Purushas, the causes, the controllers, and enjoyers of the material energy. So that's the assumption one makes. I mean, it's very easy when you don't have knowledge. You just observe something and it seems like you don't have any background understanding. So the assumption made is, all this material world that's there, it's actually for my enjoyment. I can control things, and I can enjoy this material energy. So that's the assumption that's made when there isn't any knowledge, particularly the knowledge of the science of God, as Srila Prabhupada puts it. I recall once we were traveling somewhere, and one of those scenes, where there's that I described earlier on, when you see all these tractors, huge machinery, cranes, and some mountain has been broken down, and cement is being created, and stone has been pulverized. And my spiritual master commented something to the effect of, yes, they think the mountain belongs to them. So, you just claim something. You see something and you claim it. So a company puts its name, its logo, its cement bags, the cement is packaged, and it's that mountain was claimed. So it's this idea that Srila Prabhupada puts that, not having knowledge of the science of God, one actually makes the assumption that one is the controller and the enjoyer of the material energy. So if one is understanding the science of God, Krishna, then one can accept that the ingredients of that which is materially palpable, like you can actually touch it, feel it, see it, is the separated energy of the Lord. So it's a very subtle understanding. But he's connected to his energy. That mountain that's, somebody's claimed and attempting to pulverize, it's actually the energy of the Supreme Lord. He's connected to it. So actually this energy of the Lord, it's present in all the objects that one can perceive with one's senses. So there's form, so one perceives form. One can taste something. One can smell something. One can hear something. So those are rupa, form, rasa, taste, gandhi, smell, shapha, sound, and sparsha, touch. One can touch things. So these separated energies of the Lord, they actually allow for sense perception. So again, if you're just perceiving with your senses and you don't have knowledge, you're not understanding the connection with the Supreme Lord. And Srila Prabhupada does this very interesting breakdown to help to, really explain this. And he says, within the earth, there's the fragrance of roses. And within fruits, you get, or the seed of the fruit, there's taste. And in fact, basically within the earth, there's anything you want, like anything you want, according to what your senses need. So, yeah, I mean, where I live is very close to the beach of Lake Michigan, and you can see the excitement when the day comes when it's warm enough for persons to actually get the tactile experience of the beautiful waters of Lake Michigan, or the tactile experience of the sand of the beach between their toes. So one actually gets whatever one wants is present there to allow for that experience through the senses. So in fact, the earth contains all our requirements. Um, and the objects of sense perception are present in the earth. Um, and, and that earth, Bhumi, is the same personality who's actually acknowledging this connection between Lord Krishna and his energies. So in addition to the subtle material elements, or rather in addition to these material elements, or this presence of very subtle things that can be perceivable by the senses, there's even more subtle present material element within the body, and that's in the form of the mind. So one can have thought, or one can have feeling, or one can will something. There's the intelligence, where one can actually process what one is experiencing and make some discernment. Oh, this must be this kind of fruit and not that kind of fruit, based on how it looks or how it tastes. Even if one were to be blindfolded, still one could actually utilize intelligence to understand that's coming from the earth, the fruit, and what particular fruit it is. Then there's the false ego. So that's the part of identifying in a way with what one is getting to experience through one's senses, and how the intelligence has come to process that perceptual intake of information, and then thinking that actually, because I've got access to this perceptual information, that makes me whatever, a knowledgeable person, or I am a person who's an expert in the different species of fruit, whatever it is. There's some sort of identification that happens with the ego. So this is on a very subtle element, but it's still considered a material element, but present within the body. So this is the total material energy that one is actually looking at when one's thinking of the connection between Krishna and his material energies. It extends to even these three subtle components within one's own body. It's part of Krishna's material energy that one has: the mind, the intelligence, and the ego. So within the total material energy, there are also three qualities. So these qualities are of goodness, of passion, or of ignorance. But again, they're material energy. So there's a certain quality to all these material elements that Krishna has broken down into 8 parts. So, for instance, a person in the mode of passion, and you'll experience it quite often on the road, even if you're not on the road but you're a pedestrian, somebody will have a car that they accelerate dramatically, and it makes a huge sound, and usually the car is black and it's got big visible fenders. The mode of passion is operating there. So there's a certain quality that the person's carrying in their mind and their intelligence. The mind wants to perceive things that are loud and make a noise. and so it's a quality that's present in the mind. And then the intelligence has come to operate. To achieve that, I must actually go to a mechanic and actually put in another exhaust pipe. So it's actually going to increase the sound in this vehicle, and everybody that I pass is going to hear my nice, noisy vehicle. Mode of passion, and the intelligence is operating how to achieve it. And then, of course, the person identifies, I am the person in this very zooped up black vehicle that is so loud and dramatic, and when I pass somebody, I can put my foot on the pedal and everybody can notice that I've passed. So the mode of passion, Krishna's material energy present in the mind of a particular living entity, in how the processing is of the quality of passion. So in a similar way, there's of goodness or of ignorance. So these are qualities that are not of the soul. It's still a material element, because Krishna has said the mind, intelligence, ego, it's part of his separated material energies. Then it's because of the interaction of these qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance, or these way of being. It's a way of being. One is generally more in the way of being of passion, or more in the way of being of goodness, or one's way of being is more in goodness. One, say if it's in goodness, one has a definite routine in one's day. One activity follows the next activity. There's an order to it. One actually has perhaps even a schedule that one follows. So that's more mode of goodness. So there's ways of being, and the interaction of the modes, that there's some passion, some goodness, some ignorance. It's seen in the knowledge gathering senses. So there's the 5 working senses, and their director is the mind. So as I was explaining, the senses take in information. So according to the quality of the senses, the way the information is taken in is then processed in the mind. So it will be processed either in goodness or in passion or in ignorance. And this is very evident. I mean, I gave a graphic example of the zooped up black car, the person who owns that car. But anyway, there's other examples. But it's basically that you have some evidence of this quality of passion in that person through how their working senses have taken in information and how the mind has directed things to operate around that person. So according to the way of being, the living entity gets the opportunity to experience different types of karma with different types of knowledge, thinking, feeling, and willing. So that person in that kind of karma, I mean, I'm sticking to the one example because I get exposed to it often because I walk. That person in that car is going to have to experience certain karma. So certain people are going to be very annoyed by that loud sound coming from that extra exhaust, most annoyed. And never mind annoyed when, the person is just leaving an intersection and there's pedestrians crossing and the person is like revving their engine and it's like super loud and, it frightens people. Oh, is the person about telling me to get out of the way? Do they need to turn? So the person's going to have to experience the ill feeling of others. And those that think like him, they'll be rah-rahing for him as he goes down the road. So gets to experience different types of karma. And the person will get a certain kind of knowledge based on what he's observing. He's going to come to understand, actually, some people like what I'm doing, some people don't like what I'm doing. So, and then, the thinking and the feeling and the willing has to work accordingly, according to what the person decides based on that input. So this is that body machine that everybody's working with. Now, the extraordinary insight of those practicing God realization is expressed by Prahlad Maharaj, and this is from the 7th canto and the 7th chapter, the 22nd verse. I think the verse was mentioned yesterday. It's such an extraordinary verse. This is someone practicing God realization and how the world is viewed. Here's Prahlad Maharaj. The Lord's 8 separated material energies, the 3 modes of material nature, and the 16 transformations, in brackets, the 11 senses and the 5 gross material elements like earth and water. Within all these, the one spiritual soul exists as the observer. Therefore, all the great acharyas have concluded that the individual soul is conditioned by these material elements. So, interesting. Separate from all of this that's going on is the soul, that living force who's observing. The living force is observing. And that's Prahlad Maharaj. So with all of this, the 8 separated material energies of Krishna, 3 modes of material nature, transformations, within all of these, the spirit soul exists as the observer. So of course the conclusion is that if one is the observer, then one can understand that actually all these material elements allow one to have a certain kind of learning. And that learning is called conditioning. You get caught in a pattern of behaving, a pattern of processing what your senses are taking in, a way that your mind, with the particular quality it's got, will process in a particular way. And then the intelligence will operate in a particular way according to the information coming from the mind. So this is that conditioning. It's learning patterns based on the information that's coming in and the material elements that one is already equipped with, the mind, the intelligence, and the ego. So Goddess Bhumi, she says, Maya Shakti is there. And interestingly, it's Maya Shakti acts, however, on others. She does not allow persons to see Krishna. So this is the interesting thing. Prahlad Maharaj gave the person practicing God realization. Goddess Bhumi is bringing up how Krishna's Maya Shakti is working. She's putting an emphasis on that. And actually, it's Maya Shakti who doesn't allow persons to see Krishna as, that living force that's behind all these material elements. So that's the interesting thing that Goddess Bhumi is drawing attention to. So, continuing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, Goddess Bhumi says, this is quoting, you are not covered by them like the conditioned soul, meaning these qualities of material nature. So, and you contain the activated passion, goodness, and ignorance. And indeed, you can say, Lord Hari has no connection with the material modes. So it's not that he is somehow being influenced by material quality, like, that the quality of passion or the quality of goodness or the quality of ignorance is going to be influencing how he's functioning. So the statement is he's got no connection with the material modes. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the all-seeing eternal witness who is transcendental to material nature. So just as the individual living soul is always the observer of all these material elements, these material qualities, Lord Krishna is the eternal witness, eternally existing, eternally observing. He's transcendental to material nature. So he's not caught up in material nature the way one is because of one's carrying one of his or 3 of his separated energies, that mind, intelligence, and ego. So one who worships him becomes similarly free from the material modes. That's the interesting part. So just by worshipping Lord Krishna, one's also going to become free from the way the material modes are forcing one to process and function. So this highlights that Lord Vishnu's worshipper gains the eye of transcendental knowledge instead of being blinded in some way by whatever material assets are there and wanting to claim them, own them, utilize them, enjoy them. Rather, one gets the eye of transcendental knowledge. So one is equipped to see the world from the proper perspective. So just as Goddess Bhumi understands the Lord to be the detached witness of the material creation, so too his devotee becomes aloof from all these interactions of the Lord's inferior energy. So aloof is an interesting word that's used. It means that you observe, you understand, so therefore you can be aloof. You understand it for what it is. But the interesting thing here is also, you could say that the mode of goodness is Lord Vishnu's peaceful mode. And in fact, it may not really differ substantially from his original spiritual quality, because the mode of goodness is so close to Lord Vishnu's spiritual quality. Everything's ordered, controlled, regulated. There's a consciousness of wishing to benefit everyone. So the mode of goodness doesn't differ substantially from Lord Vishnu's original spiritual quality, but still it's only a partial manifestation, the mode of goodness, or his showing of his spiritual quality in this world. Yeah. So for this reason, focusing one's consciousness upon Lord Vishnu, the embodiment of all goodness, leads one to become free from all this influence of these separated material energies of Krishna that are sort of binding one into all kinds of patterns that are colored by goodness, passion, or ignorance. So this is the extraordinary thing that comes from focusing one's consciousness on Lord Vishnu. And so this is Bhumi's statement. She says, "You are time." So this is a continuation of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the last part of his commentary, and Bhumi speaking. "You are time, Maya, and the living entities, since they are all your energies. But by your internal energy, you are separate and distinct from these entities." So that's the next part. She's even referring to, living entities as actually being part of Krishna's energy. I mean, we've heard that the mind, intelligence, and ego is part of, his separated material energies, and that there's obviously a connection, which I haven't touched on, but it's part of this thing of developing transcendental knowledge, is that the individual living force is connected to that supreme living force. But she's drawing attention to this, that by his internal energy, he is separate and distinct from the living entities. So the living entity is of the same quality of energy as the Supreme Lord by virtue of this living force, the soul part. So it's natural for the living entity to cooperate with the internal energy of the Lord. That internal energy is that living spark, that living force. But the living entity has a particular problem, and that problem is that the living entity is called marginal. And so he may cooperate with the external energy and then get put into difficulty, or he can cooperate with that internal energy, the living force, and the connection with the supreme living force. So the Lord is not perceivable through the gross senses, rather through developing a loving attitude towards him. One may come to see him within oneself and outside of oneself. So it requires that cultivation of consciousness. So this is Bhumi's statement. The Lord is all pervading, but he's not perceivable by material senses. So the material senses meaning it still has to be, one has to be equipped with knowledge and understanding to be able to perceive through one's senses. So although he is invisible, everything is resting in him. That's the extraordinary part. The whole material cosmos is a combination of his two energies, the superior spiritual energy and the inferior material energy. So both. So everything is resting in his energy. And Goddess Bhumi's statement is, although he's spread everywhere, because the material, the inferior material energy and the superior spiritual energy are both his, he doesn't lose his personal existence, and that's her point. And Krishna says this too in Bhagavad Gita 9:4. I am everywhere and everything is in me, but still I am aloof. So again, drawing attention to that, being that living force that he is. By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. So again, just drawing attention to that fact that he's aloof from the material energy and its operation. So this was a little bit complex, highly philosophical subject matter. I hope I broke it down reasonably in order and that was comprehensible. So if there's any thought on the subject matter, if something was able to be discerned or comprehended, and if there's any thought to add to the subject matter, I'd be grateful.
Thank you for the class and the breakdown of the specific bits of knowledge. I was thinking how in the science of self-realization, Srila Prabhupada says that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he says the meaning of life is enjoyment, right? So you just described how not to get confused about what the proper enjoyment is, the proper way to enjoy through service of the Lord. And I just wanted to share that it's really hard to keep all those things in mind and focus without proper association and senior association, because I don't know about everybody else, but I love race cars and pretty girls and those type of things. We grow up to be taught that little boys and grow up with their toys, and it's really hard to change the mindset without the proper association.
Yes. Well, it's true. One gets to be trained in how to perceive the world. So, what's actually carried in the, you could say it's the ego part, what you're identifying with, because you've processed how you've been trained to see the world. So, that processing has taken the form of seeing that one will be able to enjoy the world in a particular way, provided there's these loud cars that have been zooped up through the extra exhausts, or one is going to enjoy the world with a lot of members of the opposite sex that are attractive. So one identifies with those elements as equaling in the presence of those elements as equaling enjoyment, because one's been trained that way. That's what you must look for to enjoy. So the thing of the point you were bringing up, that to actually break that learned understanding and idea that one's carrying with, that one's even identifying with, believing this is true, this is how it is. um, is you were bringing up the point that needing the association of those that are attempting to fix their consciousness on Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna, um, because then you're seeing things from a different perspective. It's understanding that all those material energies that are present, they are not for one's enjoyment. They belong to the Supreme Lord, and in fact, one's actually allocated certain things that one uses to serve him. So the particular senses one's got, the particular mind one's got, the particular intelligence one's got, one's going to actually try and use it in consciousness of him, so that one's directing one's actions for his pleasure. So it's part of elevating the consciousness. And it does require cultivation. That's without a doubt, it requires cultivation. But the interesting thing is that having made, because of fixing one's consciousness on the Supreme Lord, one is lifted up from that dull material plane. And that being lifted up is very palpable, as palpable as touching a computer. It's as palpable, because one has got the separated material energies of the Supreme Lord within one. One has a mind, one does have an intelligence, one has an ego. So actually connecting one's consciousness to him directs those material energies towards him. So automatically there's a strength that comes from just having made that connection. So it's not that one is, necessarily floundering. Just through having made that little effort and that connection, there's so much strength that comes, and there's a reordering of the mind and the intelligence and the ego that starts happening automatically. And it's sort of a relief in the end. Because look how hard one has to work to try and get material enjoyment with material consciousness. You see people all around. They are slaving away in the hope that they're going to get some enjoyment. And the whole way through, it's like maybe 2 weeks of holiday in 1 year. And then for those 2 weeks, it's like, the pinnacle of achievement of material enjoyment, of being perhaps able to go to the Bahamas for 2 weeks. So all that slaving, that taking a train downtown for 40 minutes there and back every day, and going through the office drill and all the rest. Finally, there's the pinnacle of enjoyment, those 2 weeks in the Bahamas. So it's like a lot of work to get some enjoyment out of the material energy. A lot of work. But if you're in the mode of goodness, which is close to spiritual quality, then one actually can even be perfectly happy just allocating a little bit of time in one's day to go and take a walk along Lake Michigan. And it's equally satisfying, and it's in the mode of goodness, and you can do it every day. Every day you can actually touch the sand, touch the water, even go into the water. So, it's just that being caught in the particular quality that your mind and intelligence and ego has. So generally it's in the mode of passion. You're slaving away for those 2 weeks in the Bahamas, but on a daily basis you could get the same elements quite peacefully, quite in a regulated way, and be perfectly happy. So anyway, that's just the thought. Thank you very much for your comment. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Rampal Swami Maharaj ki jai.